YouTube frogs, welcome back to another complete guide, this time covering everything you need to know about our masterful Forest Watcher, Tighnari. This video assumes core basics covered in the first impressions video and uses data from the weapon comparisons video for maximum context. Links for both in the description if you want to check them out later. We'll be covering his talent design, playstyle nuances and Dendro application, optimal weapons and artifacts, Constellations, especially since he will become a standard character, team comps and new reactions, and a gameplay showcase. Friendly reminder that I stream nearly every day on Twitch, links in the description. Let's begin. At Constellation 0, Tighnari is a Dendro machine gun, outputting high volume single target Dendro attacks on a rotational basis. His strength comes from a combination of quick charge attacks and low cost burst damage, favoring a rotational swap team. He's attack percent focused, with crit damage, damage percent, and elemental mastery scaling for both his personal damage and spread reactions. Over 50% of Tighnari's practical damage output comes from his normal attack charge attack, mainly the charge attack. His charge attack maintains 2 charge levels similar to Ganyu. On level 2, he fires a Wreath Arrow, dealing single target Dendro damage that activates 4 Cluster Bloom arrows that track nearby enemies to deal single target damage as well. As long as his Wreath Arrow hits something, enemy or object, it will proc his Cluster Bloom arrows. His Dendro application and therefore spread reactions are quite unique. His Wreath Arrow, charge level 2, has no internal cooldown, seemingly applying Dendro on every single Wreath Arrow, even those quick-fired by his elemental skill. The following 4 Cluster Bloom arrows follow a slightly modified 4 hits per 2.5 seconds per element application than the usual 3 hits or 2.5 seconds. Constellation 6 does add a 5th Cluster Bloom arrow hit, dealing 150% multiplier value as damage. More details on his Dendro application and spread effectiveness in the next section. At level 6, Tighnari's total charge attack damage deals 338.1%, with C6 becoming 488.1%. You just add the plus 150%. This is before a spread amplification. Normally, his Wreath Arrow charge time is a very lengthy 2.5 seconds, which is significantly reduced with his elemental skill. Tighnari throws a Dendro Bomb towards the nearest enemy in front of him, taunting them and granting the VS effect, reducing his next 3 charge shot charge times by 2.4 seconds. This VS effect persists even when swapping Tighnari off, so you can throw his elemental skill out, swap to off-field support to set up, and then swap back and fire his 3 charge shots. This ability grants 3 to 4 Dendro orbs and rotates on a 12-second cooldown. Tighnari's Elemental Burst, Fashioner's Tanglevine Shaft. Tighnari fires 6 tracking missiles, each dealing single target Dendro damage, which fire 6 additional missiles after hitting an enemy or object. His burst follows the usual internal cooldown rules of 3 hits or 2.5 seconds, different than his charge shot, proccing twice per wave for a total of 4 times per total burst. At level 6, his burst totals 1038.6% multiplier value, with the first wave at 77.9 per and the second wave at 95.2 per. With a 40 energy cost and a 12-second cooldown, his burst can rotate fairly quickly in general team comps. Now onto his passives. They are pretty straightforward. Ascension 1 provides a 50 elemental mastery boost for 4 seconds after firing a Wreath Arrow, which is a light benefit to his spread amplification. Ascension 4 passive provides a elemental mastery into charge shot and burst damage percent scaling at a rate of 100 to 6%. This is capped at 1000 EM, which grants 60%, and a relatable comparison is a goblet's worth of 46.6% damage percent, which would correlate to 777 elemental mastery. Both of these passive universally exist in his playstyle, so you don't need to think twice about them. As for talent priority, no changes since the first impressions video. Normal attack and charge attack talent first for the charge shot damage, greater than or equal to elemental burst, which is much more valuable than elemental skill. So most of the damage comes from his elemental skill into the 3 charge attack combo, after which is his burst, and his elemental skill does not need to be leveled to provide more value than granting 3 charge attacks that reduce time. For now, I've left mine at 616. Now for playstyle nuances and a very important topic for our new Dendro units, Dendro application. Tighnari's playstyle is intuitive, straightforward, and forgiving. His elemental skill leads all rotations, and if he has his burst up, can be fired right afterwards to collect his skill's energy particles. His 3 reduced time charge shots can be used whenever within the 12-second VS effect. Teammate swaps can occur for off-field setup, or just fire them right away like I would usually do. In general, his rotation would follow elemental skill into elemental burst, into 3 charge attacks, into a second E into 3 charge attacks, and repeat. If you have the energy to sustain a perfect 12-second rotation, then elemental skill into elemental burst into 3 charge attacks and repeat. Unless you are C6, I wouldn't recommend staying on him for additional Wreath Arrow charge attacks, as the charge time feels very long without his elemental skill. When his abilities are completely on cooldown, there's usually about 6 to 8 seconds before his elemental skill comes up again, perfect time for his teammates. Now, how does his Dendro application look like, especially in spread situations? As we mentioned with his talent, his charge attack follows a unique internal cooldown style. Wreath arrows seem to have no internal cooldown, and always apply Dendro and therefore proc Quicken/spread reactions. The cluster bloom arrows that follow afterwards seem to follow every 4 hits or 2.5 seconds. So you'll notice in general, 3 charge attack rotations, you only get 1 major spread hit per cluster bloom combo. His burst follows normal rules, every 3 hits or 2.5 seconds applying Dendro. This means that his burst will be proccing spread 2 times per wave on the 1st and 4th hit, and on the 2nd wave on the 7th and 10th hit. In total, his entire rotation would usually look like this. Elemental Skill Lead applies Quicken on an Electro Aura, into Elemental Burst, which is 2 spreads, into 3 charge attacks, which is 2 spreads each, 1 per Wreath Arrow and 1 per 4 cluster blooms. Now, I'm unsure of how Constellation 6 affects this, with the 1 additional 150% multiplier value cluster bloom being fired. I wouldn't be surprised if this additional big hit is on a separate ICD to guarantee a spread, or if it just follows the rest of the cluster blooms on a 4-hit basis. Because spread is an additive damage bonus, think like Yunjin/Shenhe, they make each spread hit significantly stronger than normal hits. This additive damage bonus is increased by Elemental Mastery by a pretty significant margin. So much so that this reaction is an important part of Tighnari's natural damage output, which you can see it nearly doubles his effective DPS. Spread takes into account character level and Elemental Mastery as its base additive value, and then scales into crit damage and damage percent bonus just like Yunjin Shenhe. Overall, his Dendro application is finely tuned to work with his particular playstyle and optimizes his largest hits. Now that his basics have been covered, here's what my Constellation 0 Tighnari looks like, and what I would recommend your stat thresholds to be. He's currently level 80 out of 80, Constellation 0, 616 talents, with 4 Wanderer's Troop set, running the R1 Hunter's Path. With this signature, I sacrifice my attack and opt for an Elemental Mastery Timepiece, Dendro Goblet, and a crit damage mask. This is my replication of a fine-tuned Constellation 0 R1 Tighnari build. Those of you who run craftable weapons may stick with the Elemental Mastery Timepiece, but change the mask to crit rate. 1.1k attack, 427 Elemental Mastery, 80 crit rate, 180 crit damage, 80% Dendro, and 111% recharge. Now that you've seen what mine looks like with the Hunter's Path, here are my general recommended stats for Tighnari. Hunter's Path, sacrifice your attack for as much Elemental Mastery as possible. Otherwise, aim for 1400 plus attack. Elemental Mastery, aim for 300 plus with a minimum of 200. Crit rate crit damage, go for 6120. It's harder to build for him since his Ascension is not crit rate. Recharge is extra, about 130 to 150% for smooth 12-second burst uptime, otherwise 100% is totally fine. Since Dendro reactions scale very effectively with level, I do recommend going all the way to level 90 out of 90 instead of stopping at the level 80 soft cap. This maximizes the additive damage gained from spread and also maximizes his Dendro Ascension damage bonus. Alright, let's build him up. Optimal weapon choices first. I'll be jumping straight into the strongest practical weapons I would recommend you use for him. If you'd like to see all the bows that I showcase, the dedicated weapon comparisons video will be in the description. For my very early game players, budget 3-star Slingshot will likely be the easiest bow to achieve, and its damage output is very respectable for its resource cost. Provides an easy source of crit rate, and its passive bonus is very effective for his Wreath Arrow spread damage. Budget players, any of our craftable bows that have already been invested in high refine will be perfect to use for him. Prototype Crescent is a very strong choice, easily allows Elemental Mastery Timepiece as it grants so much default attack percent, with just one caveat of hitting your headshots. Amiyumi is very similar, it's more universal, but it's slightly weaker passive. King Squire is our new craftable bow from Sumeru, which did look stronger than the other options in the weapon comparisons video, however its buff is on a 20-second rotation and rather than a 12-second. This makes its value a bit inconsistent for Tighnari, which is why I prefer the other 2 craftables instead. Now, if you have access to older weapons like Windbloom Ode and Gacha's Stringless weapon, don't hesitate to use those as they are universally strong weapons. And for my Battle Pass gamers, the Viridescent will be slightly weaker, however, its crit rate will prove to be easier to round out your stats. For my players with 5-star weapon options, any of the DPS choices are fine, they are all within 10% strength of each other. Hunter's Path will clearly top out, but Polar Star and Aqua Simulacra are not that far behind and much more universal than Hunter's Path. If you don't have any of those, don't fret. Amos and Skyward Harp as standard banner weapons are still a decently strong and great stat sticks over the 4-star choices. Thundering Pulse will always be a nice stat stick even though the normal attack passive is useless for him. To check out all the rest of the weapons tested, weapon comparison video will be in the description. Artifacts. Those of you who watched the first impressions vid have a solid understanding of what to expect here. As primarily a charge shot DPS and secondarily a burst DPS, Tighnari follows a similar build path to Ganyu. Without requiring any of the new sets, 4-piece Wanderer's Troop will prove the easiest to obtain given its accessibility via the Strongbox, granting a clean 80 elemental mastery for the 2-piece and massive charge shot damage bonus for 4-piece. The only thing it lacks is general burst damage. Now, those of you who are able to obtain a decent 4-piece set, the Gilded Dreams 4-piece will stand as his best in slot set. Try not to run him with 4-piece Deepwood though. Save that for any of his teammates, who don't have to be Dendro, to use so that he can use a dedicated DPS set and gain both benefits from both sets. Those of you unable to grab a half-decent 4-piece Gilded or a Wanderer's Troop, these 2-piece sets will have you covered. 2-piece Dendro for the Dendro damage, 2-piece Gilded or Wanderers for 80 elemental mastery, and any of the 4 attack percent sets for 18% attack. Running a mix and match of these 2-piece sets with good substats is a great stepping stone until you get a dedicated 4-piece set, and is only 5 to 10% weaker overall. I'd prioritize 2-piece Deepwood and 2-piece Elemental Mastery over the attack percent for spread reasons. For my newer below AR45 players out there, 4-piece Instructor is a great starting point for the strict Elemental Mastery gain, and the 2-piece can always combine with attack percent or crit rate from Berserker set. Now for main stat choices. So, for Tighnari, he's actually one of the easiest to template. Regardless of whatever weapon you choose, the Dendro Goblet and crit rate crit damage mask are optimal. If you don't have a Dendro Goblet, then either an Elemental Mastery Goblet or attack percent Goblet work just fine. Prioritize an Elemental Mastery main stat if running the spread comp. For the timepiece, a general rule of thumb is Elemental Mastery is more valuable than attack percent. However, substats matter the most, so use your strongest timepiece from Elemental Mastery or attack percent. To optimize then, Hunter's Path. Elemental Mastery timepiece over attack percent timepiece with a crit damage mask. If you're running a heavy attack percent weapon, Elemental Mastery timepiece over attack percent timepiece. If you're running anything else, which includes crit, damage percent weapons like burst damage or all damage, or Elemental Mastery weapon, then attack or Elemental Mastery is fine. The better substat will win here. No matter what build path you decide to run, aim for 300 Elemental Mastery if you can, and a little bit of recharge if you're playing more burst heavy. So, as you guys may or may not know, Tighnari will eventually be added to the pool of standard banner characters. Whether or not this had any effect on his constellation strength, we'll never know. In general, his constellations are all basic increases. There's no insane power spikes, no drastic gameplay changes, and no quality of life improvements. What you get at Constellation 0 is essentially what he feels like all the way to C6, albeit a little stronger. Constellation 1. His charge attack crit rate is increased by 15%. This affects both his wreath arrows and his cluster blooms. Constellation 2. If there are opponents inside of his elemental skill, Tighnari gains 20% Dendro damage bonus. This lingers for 6 seconds after the condition expires, giving space for his charge shot rotation if necessary, and his elemental skill is no longer attracting enemies. These two constellations, C1 and C2, provide the most immediate benefit, but only provide a total of 15% DPS increase with both, at about 7% per constellation. Constellation 3 and Constellation 5, burst plus 3 levels and elemental skill levels plus 3 respectively. The C5 elemental skill plus 3 is the most useless constellation since its damage is basically negligible for his rotation. Constellation 4, activating his burst grants 60 elemental mastery for 8 seconds. If his burst procs a Dendro related reaction, the plus Pyro would be burning, plus Hydra would be bloom, plus Electro equals Quicken, and then plus Quicken equals spread. Grants 60 more elemental mastery for a total of plus 120 with the 8-second duration refreshed. This is his current highest value constellation due to it being a 120 elemental mastery party-wide buff. The caveat is that it's burst enabled, not elemental skill enabled, so its reliability is dependent on your burst uptime. For Tighnari himself, this improves his spread damage and also improves his damage percent gain from his Ascension 4 passive. Constellation 6. Tighnari's Wreath Arrow charge time is decreased by 0.9 seconds and produces 1 extra Cluster Bloom arrow at a 150% attack multiplier. This makes his charge shots even more near instant and also provides a strong 4th Cluster Bloom hit to his combos. It's a slight quality of life increase and decent damage increase. So, I find all of these constellations to be not bad, but not great. They're all minor value increases to his kit with no major jump all the way to Constellation 6. C1, C2, and C6 are his selfish DPS increases, and then Constellation 4 has the team-wide 120 elemental mastery value associated with his burst. Team compositions. As a Dendro single target DPS, Tighnari makes the most out of general quicken/spread situations. His attacks are high volume, low multiplier strength, allowing spread to amplify a large portion of his attacks, nearly doubling his effective DPS output. And as someone who is able to apply Dendro very quickly with a high flurry of attacks, this positive feedback loop also allows his Dendro application to extend into taser comps, allowing for hyperbloom compositions. So, for the quicken spread situations, we need an Electro teammate. Now, one of the best general usage characters that has only gained strength with the new Dendro element is Fischl. Well, actually Oz, but yeah. So not only does Fischl have one of the best off-field Electro presences, she's been strengthened even more with the interaction between her Ascension 4 passive and Quicken Aggravate. So if you guys don't know, Fischl's Ascension 4 passive procs additional Electro damage whenever Electro-related reaction happens. So now that we have Quicken and Aggravate, this happens all the time in Dendro compositions, and has the benefit of being an ICD-ignoring Electro application. So without going into too much detail, Fischl, even at Constellation 0, will provide one of the best supportive capabilities for Tighnari to absolutely shine. Then his strongest teams will generally revolve around this duo. The last 2 slots can be open for a lot of characters. We have Kazuha, who's available for maximizing Fischl's DPS, and if you have Constellation 2, provides team-wide elemental mastery. We also have Zhongli, who's available for higher durability and one of the few sources of Dendro resistance shred via his shield. We also have Kokomi, and she opens up Hyperbloom with this trio with double off-field supports and Tighnari to enable the reactions. Barbara is also the other Hydro healer option, though not nearly as effective as Kokomi for uptime reasons. Now, besides Fischl, interchangeable characters for her include Raiden Shogun, Yae Miko, and Beidou. These characters, however, are not nearly as effective as Fischl's Electro output with her Ascension 4 passive. This then opens up any double Electro compositions with Tighnari involving any combination of Fischl, Raiden, Yae, Beidou, and Cookie. Lisa also receives an honorable mention if you can maintain her expensive burst uptime with her lack of energy generation. So if you do decide to run more offensive Electro units, this may incentivize a durable last slot like Kokomi Barbara or Zhongli. The alternative to running double Electro composition is double Dendro composition. Instead of Electro particles generated from the double Electro, this composition opts for higher elemental mastery for higher strength and Dendro reactions. If you guys don't know, Dendro Resonance provides increasing elemental mastery based on the reactions proc. Now, we don't have many options currently, with only Kole and Dendro MC being our choices. Most of you will likely gravitate towards Dendro MC and combine these two with Fischl. Now, in my first impressions video, I did mention Burning Calm for Tighnari. However, after further inspection, burning is much weaker than I initially anticipated, and it's much more worth to maximize quick and spread comps. The flat additive gain from spread and aggravate is so powerful in those situations that it's much more worth than what Bennett can provide in those teams. Now onto a little bit of a showcase. Here's a mixture of general interactions with Tighnari and Electro supports, alongside a demonstration of double Electro and Hyperbloom Tighnari comps. Cue the music, Mr. Cope.
See, I hear everything.
Cheap. Solidify.
Wings of darkness.
Come at the forest.
That won't work. Take this. Stabilize.
Can't see. I like root.
Fall before me.
Ha. Ja. Ha.
Solidify.
Come at the forest. Ha. Ja.
You win. Stabilize.
Shine down.
Can't see. Ja.
That won't work.
Ha.
Cheap.
Wow. I like root. Ja.
What's one more? Gather.
Right here.
And shroud. Let's nip that in the bud. Ha.
And that about sums things up. Tighnari has given us our first taste of Dendro-related compositions in the form of charge shots and burst damage. High hit count, high element application, with lower multipliers gives Dendro reactions an easy avenue to shine for both him and his supports. Flexible weapon choices and strong boxing artifacts give him existing builds not requiring the new Sumeru stuff. I personally find him quite enjoyable to play, with millions of numbers on screen and an easy to use charge shot playstyle courtesy of his elemental skill charge reduction. That wraps up all my general findings and concludes a massive set of general info videos on Tighnari. Thank you guys for all your patience and continuing to support my videos so that I can share with you frogs what I enjoy doing. Thank you guys for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, we'll see you next time. Take care.